to address it as we go forward. So having said that, Chelsea Green is a clinical professor at Miami University, where I am a VAP, a visiting assistant professor. She's been with us over 3 years. She is a wonderful partner in developing casework, and in developing practices and in drafting. We hit a home run at Miami when we were lucky enough to recruit her. She also has an active CPA and a master's in finance. So with that, and I'm Karen Myers. I've hung out at Miami for now 24 years, almost 25 years. I was part-time and an attorney for 23 of those in corporate America. And then I flipped into full-time. I still do some part-time casework that I can bring to the classroom. So with that, I'm going to introduce Wanda, because she is going to do a big introduction of the work that she's done and the importance of movies. If you have a question, put it in chat. We'll look forward to it. So with that, Wanda, do you want to start your share screen?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just switch to share screen. Can you see it?
We can. You're perfect.
Oh, good. Well, this is me. And I have a book on, business ethics and movies that and also I use cases. So if you want to get into more detail, the book could help. If you just want an article, you can email me and I'll send you one. But I'm going to start out with what I consider a basic truth. Students love stories, they love movies, they love cases, and that can reshape our teaching because it offers a way for them to get hands-on in more concrete there rather than abstract principles and so on. And it draws them in, and then you can go from that to ethical theories or to generalizing. But meanwhile, they make an excellent platform for developing analysis and sharpening moral reasoning. So I highly encourage using films, documentaries, and cases. I set out my book in my class in 3 ways. One is moral navigation, where you get the tools for the journey. Secondly is moral leadership, where you get values and ethical theories and ethics codes, which we apply as a conceptual framework to the films. And lastly, moral reflection, where we look at complex ethical dilemmas and apply the theory and codes and discuss such issues. And these ones are especially thorny: environmental disasters, workplace violence, workplace inequities, workplace harassment, and global justice. The three tools are: one, to deconstruct the film, and I use Aristotle's Poetics. It makes a great framework where you look for the plot, the character, themes, dialogue, music, any special effects. If you know the Poetics, you know it's the big 3 are the first 3, especially plot. He puts a lot of importance on that. So that helps to get a handle on the film before you go any further. Secondly is to deconstruct the cases, setting out the key details with a case checklist I'll show you. And thirdly, to deconstruct or construct arguments so that they are well reasoned. The case study checklist you apply to real world cases like, well, right now going on is the Kia Hyundai issue about the cars exploding, and you better park on the street. They say, don't get too near to your house. So you can break it down by define the problem, what are the main issues, set out the key players, state the facts, and if you're using this with a film plot, clarify the key concepts and values you're interested in. Set out your criterion of assessment. What matters? How is that going to shape our evaluation? Get a perspective, looking at different points of view or even what your opponent might say, and then to make a plan. So if you're setting policy, you'll involve construction. If you're evaluating, you'll do deconstruction. And the checklist helps with both. The third tool is having to do with arguments. And this is just basic stuff about, you want to pull out the thesis, look at the evidence, what type of argument it is, inductive, deductive, then sort and weigh the premises, and then check for any unwarranted assumptions or omissions or biases. And finally, does your premises support the conclusion? That's our first one. People getting those tools are now ready to go. There's 4 vehicles I use. One, the big one here obviously is movies and documentaries. Secondly, are cases. And third, ethics codes. Ethics codes you can get by running a search for the business plus ethic code and get the code. For example, Johnson & Johnson plus ethics code, you'll get their code and you can use that. And then last are ethical theories. I think it's very important for students to be at ease with knowing and applying ethical theories. So the 5 strategies. 1, start with your film. Film could be any film you pick, The Insider, Up in the Air, Wall Street, Michael Clay, Hidden Figures, etc. Study it as a text, pulling out the ethical dilemmas. Use Aristotle's Big 6, plot, character, theme, so on, to deconstruct the movie. And then using that groundwork, we can impact the values and issues. Examples. You're having lunch with one of, and then they can pick a character, Ryan Bingham and Up in the Air, Bud Fox or Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, Mookie or Sal and Do the Right Thing. Drawing from a scene, set out the way moral obligations or learning from mistakes help shape our values and actions. Another example, teach a moral lesson. What does it take to develop moral character and be an ethical role model? Drawing from 2 scenes, write a letter to one of these characters, Aaron Brockovich, Jeffrey Wigan from The Insider, Rito Grady from Made in Dead and How, Bud Fox from Wall Street. Third example, make a difference. Discuss how we can address social injustice and make the world a better case. Write a letter. Or you could have them dialogue. I mean, I like letters because students tend to relax with letters. Doesn't feel so scary. Nelson Mandela in the movie Invictus, which I really like. Thurgood Marshall from Marshall, Gandhi, Cesar Chavez. And so you're trying to discuss justice issues. Or you could start with a case where you go with a real world case in business. Tylenol is a great one, the Ford Pinto with the gas tank problem, SARS or COVID. A recent one with Dolan, Listeria, and the packaged salads. Deepwater, film recovery system. OxyContin, which is right now in the news, that's a big great one. Set out the case using your checklist. After studying the case, you could then link to a movie with similar issues or Example, Tylenol case. What are the ethical concerns related to the case? What are the top three? What should you do in terms of a first response? How do you restore the public's confidence, keep your locals? Like, for example, the FBI told Johnson & Johnson they should not name it Tylenol anymore. They should rename it. That's the question. They refused. They kept the name. But they were concerned that that might lead people away from using the product and scare them. But Johnson & Johnson thought there was more integrity in keeping the name. You could use a Tylenol case and bring in other strategies like their ethics code or ethical theory. What would Kant, Aristotle, utilitarian recommend? What would they think of the CEO, James Burke? Then you could connect to the film Michael Clayton, which is a great film. What ethicists would think of the characters, Michael Clayton, Arthur Eames, Karen Crowder, or the values in the movie. Or you could, another strategy, start with your ethics code, or you construct or use an ethics code that's out there. All kinds of, I just listed a bunch of companies, but they all have an ethics code. Dunkin' Donuts is actually quite interesting. Costco's is very short. LAX, I interviewed them. They used Aristotle to create theirs. Apply it to the film, use as a framework of analysis and grasping the priorities and values. Example, what are the main things you think a company's ethics code should contain? What values to emphasize? How does a particular ethics code measure up? So you could then go to one or two and look at. I had people compare Apple and Google's. That was interesting. Google's is much more casual than Apple's, which is more formal. What values stand out? What would you add? Or finally, you could start with ethical theory, which if you're big into theory, this is a really good way to go. Pick any theory, review the key aspects and principles of the theory so you're ready to go, then apply it to a film. Example, Aristotle would like to see how movies could teach us moral virtues. Draw from one of these, John Q, Contagion, Spotlight, Hidden Figures, etc. Whatever movie you want. Jeffrey Wigand in The Insider is struggling with being a whistleblower. What would Aristotle advise him to do? Draw from 3 of his moral virtues and 1 of his intellectual virtues. The Insider is a great movie. There's Jeffrey Wigand, a whistleblower, and Lowell Bergman at CBS, who's also on the film. That's a factor. So you could use the 2 characters. Third thing with theory would be to apply Kant's categorical imperative, for example, to the movie Shattered Glass about a dishonest journalist. The last strategy is using a combination where we begin with one thing, film, case, code, etc., then put them together. And this way, this is really effective to reinforce your values and what you're trying to do. Example, assess the handling of the case, Tylenol case, using Johnson & Johnson's ethics code or an ethicist like John Rawls or utilitarian, what they'd recommend. Then bring in Michael Clayton. What would the ethicists think of the key players or the values expressed? Different example, W.R. Gray's case on toxic spilling of Woburn, Massachusetts. A number of children got leukemia. This is the basis of the movie Civil Action. So you could bring in the case and then civil action, which the lawyers think it's one of the best movies made civil action. That and My Cousin Vinny, if you know My Cousin Vinny. Let me look just a second. Get out of here. We need the next. I'd like us to, here's some strategy. I listed all kinds of films that work well. Some documentaries in here, some dramas. And if you're interested, I can send this to you. And the value of using layering. So here I already talked about Michael Klein, Insider. You could go Insider, Big Tobacco, Aristotle, North Country, which is about sexual harassment. The Jensen versus Civil Mine case, a big, huge case, sexual harassment. Bring in Ross or feminist ethics. Contagion, which is a great film to use with COVID. Even down to the whole thing right now with the horse medicine and the movie, if you saw it, there's a guy with a selling what he called forsynthian. And it's very similar, kind of trying to make money off of people's fears. Food Inc. is a good documentary to use. There's all kind of food recalls. Tyson's, Listeria, Salmonella with Foster Farms. Anyway, more examples. Wall Street, Martha Stewart, Dark Waters, DuPont, Deepwater, oil spill, and so on. If you haven't seen Dope Sick, it's very good. It's a little bit long. It's 8 series, but it's very compelling, a drama about OxyContin. Brings it in, it's a very recent one. Also, there's several about, you could link into Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby. I really like the movie Polytechnique about a universal shooting in Montreal, where the shooter targeted just women. He killed 14 girls. And then Aaron Brockovich is a good one to use if you do stuff with environment. So I'll end with an exercise. There's 2 methods I use that are really wonderful. One is to go back and place yourself in the context as it happens. Secondly is to look from the present, looking back, and how you're looking at what happened and what should have happened. So you start with the context that you are there as it happens. 2007, you're head of security, 30,000 students, big camps, dorms are one end, classrooms at the other. 7:15 a.m., you've been notified 2 people were shot and killed in one of the dorms. Think about what should you do as a first response and what order. So students have to come up with, what are you going to do? How do you communicate it to everyone? Or do you communicate it, as the case may be? What ethical issues do you face given the shooter has not been apprehended? Round 2, 2.5 hours have passed. You figure those killings are a domestic dispute and the killer will be found soon. You didn't lock down the campus or send out a campus alert thinking it's isolated incident. As it turns out, the killer left campus and returned to the classroom building, chained the door shut and killed 30 more, 27 students and 5 faculty. You're still in charge. What are you going to do? What should you do as a second response? And what order? What do you communicate to everyone? What are the ethical issues you face given the shooter took his own life? What changes should be made? You may realize what case this is, Virginia Tech. Of course, since then, there's been many more mass shootings. According to Education Week, there's been 10 school shootings this year, 2022, 102 since 2018. The highest number, 34, were last year. So it's a very serious problem. And it's not just schools, it's also shopping malls, airports, businesses, and so on. And so using that techniques then and now, you can bring up a lot of stuff. Anyway, that's what I recommend. We have more time, we can talk. We can talk in the,
Yeah, Wanda, you have a question from Catherine Walter, and she wants to know, does this work with TV shows in the same way?
just a second, please. I need to shop. What did you say?
Let me say again. We have a question from Catherine, and she wants to know if the same methodology can be used with TV shows.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Dope Sick is a TV show, and it's about the Purdue Pharma. But there's all kind of shows. The one on DuPont is excellent because they discuss Rob Bilotto, who was a lawyer for DuPont and turned against them. And after he found out of all the deaths from the toxic chemicals that they spilled. And on Teflon, there was one about DuPont and Teflon that's very good. These are documentaries. So when it comes to TV, you have documentaries, plus you have dramas, movies. Many are available on TV for free or for $1.99 or whatever. But they work very well. I highly encourage you.
Right, just as a disclosure, Wanda, Catherine further said she teaches health and medical ethics. And Catherine, I just finished another book that Wanda wrote called Doctors and Torture. It's available on Amazon, and I would strongly encourage you to read that. It's got some real wonderful insights into the evolving world of medical practice.
Well, I think if you're interested in torture at all, one issue that goes beyond detention facilities like Guantanamo Bay is solitary confinement. Any given day in the US, 80,000 people are in solitary. And I think that's a form of torture, extremely damaging. And I think it'd be very good for students to give that some thought because juveniles are also put in solitary confinement.
That is true. As you can see, Wanda is a wonderful source of information. Anybody else have a question before we go on to Chelsea Green?
Oh, please note too, you can email me if you have questions or want any help finding stuff. I'm happy to be a resource.